Ethan Rowe, Lena Rowe, and Mark Hastings seemed like ordinary residents of a quiet American town, but behind their familiar faces hid a web of forbidden desire, obsession, and deadly secrets that would shatter everything Pine Hollow thought it knew, and end in a murder no one could have imagined. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Pine Hollow sat quietly between long highways and endless farmland, a place most people passed without noticing. The town had one main road, a few family-owned stores, and rows of old houses that carried decades of history. People believed nothing truly bad could happen there. Crime was rare, and when something small did occur, it became the main topic for weeks. Trust was the foundation of daily life, and familiarity ruled everything. Everyone knew everyone else, or at least believed they did. Ethan Rowe arrived back in Pine Hollow on a cold autumn evening. His return did not create excitement, but it did not go unnoticed either. Some recognized him instantly, while others felt a strange sense of familiarity without knowing why. Ethan had lived there as a child before leaving with his parents after family conflict no one liked to discuss. Years had passed, and memories had faded, but his last name still carried weight. The Rowe family history was deeply rooted in the town, filled with land ownership, old disputes, and unspoken incidents. Ethan settled into a small rented house on the edge of town. He kept to himself and followed a predictable routine. He worked during the day, came home early, and avoided unnecessary attention. To outsiders, he seemed calm and responsible. Inside, however, he carried unresolved emotions tied to his childhood and family past. Returning to Pine Hollow was not accidental. It was a choice driven by something unfinished, something he never fully escaped. The town itself felt frozen in time. Old trees lined the streets, and faded photographs hung inside local buildings, showing generations of families smiling for the camera. Every corner held memories for someone. For Ethan, each familiar place stirred feelings he tried to suppress. He passed houses connected to relatives, places where laughter once existed and later turned into silence. Pine Hollow did not welcome change, and Ethan understood that better than most. People observed him quietly. They noticed his careful behavior and his habit of avoiding social events. Some believed he was simply private. Others sensed something deeper, something uneasy. Small towns have a way of noticing patterns even when no one speaks about them openly. Ethan felt those silent eyes on him, but chose to ignore them. He believed the past could stay buried if left untouched. What no one realized was that Pine Hollow was not as peaceful as it appeared. Beneath the calm routines and polite smiles, secrets slept patiently. Old family bonds, once broken, still existed beneath the surface. Ethan's return was like reopening a locked door that should have remained closed. The town's quiet nature only amplified what was hidden rather than erasing it. As nights grew longer, Ethan spent hours alone, reflecting on choices made long ago. He believed he could control whatever came next. Pine Hollow, however, had its own way of dragging the past into the present. What began as a quiet homecoming was already moving towards something darker. No one knew it yet, but the town's silence was about to be broken in a way it would never forget. Ethan's return slowly reopened connections he believed were long gone. Family ties in Pine Hollow never truly disappeared. They only faded into the background. Among those ties was Lena Rowe, his cousin, who had remained in town her entire life. She lived quietly, worked locally, and kept a low profile much like Ethan. Their families had drifted apart after an old dispute, but blood connections still existed, even if rarely acknowledged. Their first encounter after years apart felt accidental, but carried an instant sense of familiarity. Time had changed them both. Lena was no longer the girl Ethan remembered, and Ethan was no longer the boy who once left town suddenly. Shared memories from childhood resurfaced naturally. At first, their interactions seemed harmless, built on family history and curiosity about lost years. They met occasionally in public places, careful not to attract attention. As weeks passed, their connection deepened. They found comfort in each other's understanding of the past. Both carried emotional gaps left by family silence and unresolved tension. Those gaps slowly filled with something more intense. What started as emotional closeness crossed boundaries neither had planned to face. The awareness of being related added fear, but it also added secrecy, and secrecy gave the bond a dangerous strength. They kept everything hidden. Meetings became deliberate and carefully planned. They avoided familiar locations and chose quiet spaces where no one would recognize them. Every interaction was wrapped in caution. The risk made their feelings feel more real, more urgent. Each step deeper into secrecy pulled them further away from reason. They convinced themselves that silence meant safety and that no one would ever know. Lena began to see their connection as a way out of her stagnant life. Pine Hollow felt suffocating to her. She dreamed of leaving, of starting somewhere new where the past had no power. Ethan, however, viewed the situation differently. For him, the relationship was something to control, not something to expose. He believed secrecy could last forever if managed carefully. That difference in thinking quietly widened the space between them. Fear became a constant presence. Every passing car, every familiar face brought anxiety. They watched each other closely, not out of trust, but out of worry. The bond that once felt comforting started to feel heavy. Still, neither wanted to step away. The consequences of ending it felt just as frightening as continuing. Unspoken tension replaced excitement. The reality of their situation slowly pressed in. They were bound by blood, history, and choices they could not undo. What felt like love existed in shadows, never allowed to breathe openly. Each day they stayed silent, the weight grew heavier. The affair no longer felt like an escape. It felt like a trap forming quietly around them. Neither of them realized how close they were to losing control. In Pine Hollow, where nothing seemed to change, something irreversible was already taking shape, hidden behind routine smiles and careful silence. The relationship settled into a secret rhythm that neither Ethan nor Lena spoke about openly. Their lives continued as usual on the surface, but beneath that normalcy, everything revolved around careful timing and isolation. They avoided routines that could raise suspicion and constantly adjusted their movements to stay unseen. What once felt thrilling began to feel exhausting, yet neither was willing to stop. The secrecy had become part of who they were. They traveled outside Pine Hollow whenever possible, choosing places where no one knew their names. Those trips gave Lena hope. She imagined a future far from the town, free from judgment and whispers. Each time they returned, the weight of Pine Hollow felt heavier. The contrast between freedom elsewhere and confinement at home intensified her desire to leave permanently. She believed distance could erase consequences. Ethan did not share that belief. He viewed those trips as temporary escapes rather than solutions. Pine Hollow represented control, familiarity, and safety. Leaving meant uncertainty, and uncertainty made him uncomfortable. He began to set limits, deciding when they could meet and where. His need to manage the situation grew stronger as Lena's desire for independence increased. The imbalance quietly shifted power in his favor. Their connection changed tone. Moments that once felt tender became tense. Silence replaced comfort. Lena sensed Ethan pulling back emotionally while tightening his grip on secrecy. She started questioning whether their bond meant the same thing to both of them. The lack of clarity unsettled her, but fear kept her from pushing too hard. She worried that challenging him could expose everything. Pressure from the outside world increased without direct confrontation. Familiar faces lingered longer during chance encounters. People asked casual questions that felt too curious. Even without proof, the town's watchful nature created constant anxiety. Lena felt trapped between staying silent and risking exposure. Ethan, however, believed fear was manageable if controlled properly. As weeks passed, Lena became more restless. She wanted answers, commitment, and a plan. She began leaving small traces of her frustration behind, subtle actions that hinted at her breaking point. Ethan noticed and responded by becoming more distant. He convinced himself that emotional separation would reduce risk. Instead, it created resentment. What neither of them understood was how quickly obsession can replace affection. Ethan's need to keep everything hidden turned into a need to keep Lena contained within his rules. Lena's hope for freedom transformed into desperation. Their secret world, once built on mutual choice, now felt unstable and dangerous. Sleep became difficult. Thoughts repeated endlessly, circling fear, desire, and regret. The relationship no longer offered comfort or escape. It became a source of constant tension. Each day they remained connected without resolution. The situation tightened around them, like a closing door. In Pine Hollow, where silence often meant survival, their unspoken conflict grew louder with each passing day. The love they tried to protect in shadows was slowly reshaping into something darker, something neither of them could fully control anymore. The calm structure of Pine Hollow began to show small signs of disturbance. Nothing obvious, nothing that could be pointed to directly, but enough to create unease. People noticed patterns before they noticed reasons. Cars parked too long in unfamiliar places, lights turning on at odd hours, movements that did not match routine. In a town built on predictability, even the smallest irregularity stood out. Lena felt the change first. Ordinary errands felt heavier, as if eyes followed her everywhere. Casual greetings seemed longer, more observant. She sensed judgment even when no words were spoken. The secrecy that once protected her now felt fragile. Every day demanded more effort to maintain normal appearances. The pressure slowly wore her down, making her impatient and anxious. Ethan reacted differently. He became stricter, more deliberate in his actions. He reduced their meetings and insisted on tighter control over when and where they crossed paths. He believed discipline could silence suspicion. To him, the solution was not distance between them, but deeper secrecy. His confidence in managing the situation made him blind to how close it was to collapse. The emotional distance between them widened. Lena interpreted Ethan's behavior as indifference. She felt unseen and undervalued, reduced to a risk rather than a partner. Her desire to escape Pine Hollow turned urgent. She began thinking less about consequences and more about survival. Staying silent no longer felt safe. The idea of leaving alone started to take shape in her mind. Rumors moved quietly, never fully forming but always present. Pine Hollow did not confront issues directly. It allowed suspicion to grow in silence. This silence created tension that pressed inward. Lena felt it daily, while Ethan dismissed it as paranoia. That difference in perception made their connection unstable. Lena began pushing for clarity. She wanted decisions, timelines, and certainty. Ethan responded with withdrawal. He avoided emotional engagement and focused only on containment. Control replaced affection entirely. What once felt mutual now felt one-sided. The imbalance made Lena unpredictable, and unpredictability terrified Ethan. Mistakes followed, small misjudgments, slight delays, moments of carelessness, nothing dramatic, but enough to signal that control was slipping. Ethan noticed these signs and responded with increased isolation. He believed tightening restrictions would restore order. Instead, it increased resentment and fear. Lena's hope slowly turned into anger. She felt trapped by both the relationship and the town. The future she imagined seemed unreachable. Her patience eroded as the weight of secrecy pressed harder each day. Ethan sensed her shift, but underestimated its danger. He believed fear would keep her compliant. The atmosphere between them became heavy and unstable. Every interaction carried tension. Trust no longer existed, only shared risk. Pine Hollow remained quiet, but beneath that calm, something was unraveling. The secret that once felt powerful now threatened to expose everything. Both of them stood on the edge of consequences they could no longer predict or prevent. The storm arrived late in the evening, thick clouds rolling over Pine Hollow as if the sky itself carried tension. Rain fell steadily, washing the streets empty and forcing people indoors. It was the kind of night that erased movement and sound, perfect for isolation. Ethan drove through the darkness toward Lena's farmhouse, his thoughts heavy and unsettled. The road felt longer than usual, every mile adding pressure to an already fragile state of mind. Lena had been waiting. The silence of the farmhouse felt unbearable as the hours passed. Her thoughts raced between fear and determination. She had reached a breaking point. The secrecy, the control, the lack of direction had drained her completely. She no longer saw their relationship as something that could be fixed. That night was meant to bring clarity, one way or another. When Ethan arrived, the air between them felt different immediately. Nothing felt familiar anymore. The tension that had been building for weeks filled the space completely. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside both of them. Emotions that had been suppressed for too long rose uncontrollably. The situation moved faster than either expected, driven by frustration, fear, and loss of control. Ethan felt his carefully managed world slipping away. The sense of control he relied on was gone, replaced by panic. Every fear he had tried to contain suddenly felt real. The thought of exposure, judgment, and irreversible consequences overwhelmed him. Logic disappeared beneath emotion. What followed was not planned, but it was fueled by everything that had been building beneath the surface. Inside the farmhouse, the conflict reached a point of no return. Anger replaced restraint. Fear overpowered reason. In a moment driven by desperation rather than intent, violence erupted. The storm outside drowned out everything. When the chaos ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than the rain. Lena lay motionless on the floor as the reality of what had happened settled in. Blood stained the wood beneath her, a permanent mark of a decision that could never be undone. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the scene he never imagined would exist. The secret he tried to protect had transformed into something far worse. Panic took over, thoughts raced without order. Staying was not an option. He moved quickly, wiping away traces where he could, though his actions were rushed and careless. The weight of what he had done pressed on him, but fear pushed him forward. Before dawn, he left the farmhouse behind, the rain washing away footprints, but not guilt. As the storm faded, Pine Hollow slept unaware of what had occurred. The farmhouse stood quiet again, holding the truth inside its walls. By morning, the town's illusion of safety would shatter. What began as a hidden love had ended in irreversible violence, setting into motion a chain of events that would expose everything Ethan tried so hard to hide. Morning arrived quietly, unaware of the horror left behind at the farmhouse. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy and still. When Lena failed to appear for work and did not answer calls, concern slowly replaced routine. In Pine Hollow, absence never went unnoticed. By afternoon, someone drove out to the farmhouse to check on her. What they found shattered the town's fragile sense of safety. The scene was immediately disturbing. Blood marked the floor, furniture was overturned, and Lena's body lay cold and unmoving. The violence was impossible to ignore. Law enforcement arrived quickly, sealing off the area that once felt isolated and peaceful. Word spread fast, carried by shock rather than gossip. Pine Hollow had never witnessed something so brutal. The farmhouse became the center of attention, surrounded by flashing lights and unanswered questions. Investigators moved carefully, documenting every detail. The scene told a story of chaos rather than intrusion. There were no signs of forced entry. That fact alone narrowed the focus. Whoever was responsible had been welcomed inside. The idea unsettled the town more than the crime itself. It suggested betrayal, not randomness. As evidence was collected, patterns began to form. Phone records revealed frequent contact with one number, often late at night. Travel logs showed repeated trips out of town that matched another person's movements. Small handwritten notes were discovered hidden away, suggesting a relationship that went far beyond family familiarity. Each detail added weight to a truth no one expected. The investigation moved quietly but steadily. Officers spoke to neighbors, family members, and co-workers. Reactions ranged from disbelief to silent suspicion. The image people had of Lena did not match the private life uncovered by evidence. The town struggled to reconcile what they thought they knew with what was emerging. Attention slowly shifted toward Ethan. His sudden absence raised concerns. He had been seen recently, but no one knew where he was now. Investigators traced his movements and confirmed he had left town shortly before the body was discovered. That timing was impossible to ignore. What once felt like coincidence now felt deliberate. As more evidence surfaced, the hidden relationship became impossible to deny. The shock rippled beyond Pine Hollow. Media interest followed, drawn by the disturbing mix of family ties and violence. The case grew larger than the town itself. What had been carefully hidden for so long was now exposed under harsh scrutiny. Inside Pine Hollow, trust collapsed. People questioned each other and themselves. Familiar faces felt unfamiliar. The sense of safety that defined the town was gone. The farmhouse stood as a reminder that darkness can exist even in places that appear untouched. By the end of the day, the investigation had shifted direction entirely. This was no longer a mystery of who committed the crime, but how such a secret had survived for so long. The truth was unfolding piece by piece, and it promised consequences that would reach far beyond a single night of violence. Ethan was captured 2 days later at a remote bus station near the state border. He looked exhausted, unshaven, and disconnected from reality. His attempt to disappear had failed quickly. Investigators noted how little effort he made to resist. It was as if running had only drained him, not freed him. Once in custody, the carefully built version of his life collapsed completely. Evidence against him was already overwhelming. Surveillance footage placed his vehicle near Lena's farmhouse on the night of the murder. Phone records confirmed repeated contact between them, far beyond what could be explained by family ties. Financial records showed shared expenses connected to their secret trips. Each detail strengthened a case that no longer relied on speculation, but on documented fact. As investigators pieced together the timeline, a disturbing pattern emerged. The relationship had been driven by secrecy, control, and fear rather than affection. What appeared from the outside as a hidden romance was, beneath the surface, unstable and emotionally dangerous. Ethan's need to control outcomes and prevent exposure became central to understanding the crime. During questioning, his emotional state shifted noticeably. The calm image he maintained in Pine Hollow disappeared. Signs of obsession, paranoia, and desperation surfaced. He did not present as someone who lost control in a single moment, but as someone who had been slowly unraveling. The murder was not random. It was the result of pressure building without release. The revelation of the incestuous relationship shocked even experienced investigators. The case drew national attention almost instantly. Media coverage focused not only on the brutality of the crime, but on the hidden bond that preceded it. Public reaction was intense. The story challenged assumptions about family, trust, and what people are capable of hiding. Legal proceedings moved forward quickly. Prosecutors presented the relationship as the motive, arguing that fear of exposure and loss of control led directly to violence. Physical evidence from the farmhouse supported this narrative. Forensic analysis confirmed Ethan's presence during the crime. There was no alternative explanation left to consider. Pine Hollow watched from a distance as the case unfolded. The town that once valued privacy now saw its name associated with a national scandal. People struggled with guilt, wondering how they missed the warning signs. Familiar memories became uncomfortable. The idea that such a secret could exist unnoticed forced the community to confront its own silence. Ethan's trial concluded with a conviction that left little room for doubt. The sentence was severe, reflecting both the crime itself and the betrayal involved. Lena's life was reduced in headlines to the circumstances of her death, a reality that angered those who knew her beyond the scandal. The truth was finally public, but it brought no closure. Instead, it left behind questions about how easily darkness can hide behind routine and familiarity. The case became a reminder that secrets built on fear rarely stay buried, and when they surface, the damage is often irreversible. The final verdict marked the end of the legal process, but it did not bring peace to Pine Hollow. The town returned to its routines, yet everything felt altered. Familiar streets carried an invisible weight. People still greeted one another, but trust no longer came easily. The crime had taken more than a life. It had stolen the town's sense of innocence. Lena's farmhouse remained empty. No one wanted to buy it, and no one wanted to live near it. The building stood as a silent reminder of how easily normal life can fracture. Over time, weeds grew around the property, and the structure slowly deteriorated. It became a symbol of a secret that refused to fade away. Ethan disappeared into the prison system, his name mentioned only when the case resurfaced in documentaries and articles. He spent his days confined by concrete walls, far from the control he once clung to. The freedom he feared losing was gone forever. His attempt to protect his world had destroyed it completely. The community struggled with collective guilt. Many wondered whether earlier intervention could have changed the outcome. Small signs that once seemed meaningless now felt obvious in hindsight. Silence, once valued as respect, began to feel like neglect. The town slowly learned that ignoring discomfort can allow danger to grow unchecked. Families in Pine Hollow became more open with one another. Conversations that once felt uncomfortable were no longer avoided. Parents watched more closely, and neighbors paid more attention. The crime reshaped how the town viewed privacy and responsibility. Tragedy had forced awareness where comfort once existed. Outside Pine Hollow, the case remained a disturbing example of hidden relationships and their potential consequences. True crime audiences dissected every detail, searching for explanations. Experts discussed the psychological patterns behind secrecy and control, yet no analysis could fully explain the loss or restore what had been taken. Lena's memory became complicated. Some remembered her as quiet and hardworking, others as a symbol of a taboo that shocked the nation. Over time, those who truly knew her worked to separate her identity from the crime. They spoke of her dreams, her kindness, and her desire for a better life, refusing to let her story end with violence alone. The town never fully healed, but it changed. Pine Hollow learned that danger does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it grows silently, protected by routine and familiarity. The case served as a warning that secrets built on fear can consume everyone involved. In the end, what remained was not just a story of murder, but a lesson about human vulnerability. Love hidden in darkness can twist into something destructive. When silence replaces honesty, the cost can be irreversible. Pine Hollow moved forward carrying that truth, forever shaped by a crime it could never forget.